it is that time for Party Scoopers. We get a Democrat, we get a Republican, Molly Nelson, and we put them in the studio at the same time.
And sometimes they're civil and sometimes they're not. But I know you two are civil.
We're civil.
And respectful.
Yes,
Yes,
very
you two
civil.
are.
Of course, we have Jeff Link over here representing the Democratic side, and of course Craig Robinson over here representing the Republican side. And just first and foremost, want to thank Craig for your assistance and our guest coming up in about a half an hour or so. Appreciate
Yeah, Rick
that.
Santorum.
He'll be coming in here, and we do have, just so you know, Rick, we do have your parting question right there. I just showed it to you. So these are the questions you haven't been asked anywhere else. Right there. So just give them a sneak peek.
Tune
of that.
in.
Okay.
That ought to be good.
Okay. That'll be good. Now, what is happening over on the Democratic side?
Well, we had Secretary Clinton was in the state yesterday, and she was briefly in Des Moines. In fact, my office is over in the East Village, and I saw on Twitter that she ended up at Scenic Route Coffee, and a bunch of people saw her over there, and it was just sort of an off-the-record stop. But really, it seems like she's been hitting much more rural counties, and I think they had a stop in Indianola and Burlington and a few other places yesterday, and I think that's a very smart strategy, particularly given that the Sanders strength appears to be on the college campuses. And in fact, in the last Iowa poll, it said that like 27% of his total vote was coming just out of Iowa City and Ames and Cedar Falls, and those three counties only make up about 23% of the delegates. So he's getting more support in the college towns than he is in any of the other places, and the reason why that matters is because delegates are assigned throughout the state. And if you have concentrated support in a certain area, that means you're underperforming in the rest of the state. And if you're underperforming in the rest of the state, that's a real opportunity, I think, for the Clinton campaign.
And this is where Democrats and Republicans are completely different on caucus night, where a vote is a vote on the Republican side. And so you can just, you can keep mining and going deep, deep, deep in communities, and it helps your vote total, where, you keep digging in the Democrat side and you already got the delegates wrapped up. You need to go work in other places. So it's interesting. But again, I think that shows you why some of the polling can be misleading sometimes, where, if you're looking at Iowa polls on the Republican side, sometimes these polls don't, you'd have to oversample sometimes to find rural support or a niche support in some of these really conservative areas in northwest Iowa, some of these rural counties. So.
And that leads me to the question of Rick Santorum. He's about to be here. He won this thing 4 years ago. Why does he keep spending so much time in Iowa when he's polling so low?
Well, I think you look at the environment in terms of the caucus voter, and so it's a better fit. I mean, he can't necessarily go focus in New Hampshire. That's not a state that's really, hospitable to a social conservative like Santorum. And even South Carolina, we've seen candidates before where they try to create this South Carolina firewall. Well, you got to get to South Carolina, and if you're not doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire, you're not going to be viable. You're not going to be viable anyway. So it's smart of him to use his time in Iowa to kind of continue to do that and to campaign everywhere and make those personal connections. He's actually done a lot of house parties, which is completely different than, that's a New Hampshire thing. And he's been doing that in Iowa.
What,
which
spinning
is
tunes, or what's he doing?
No. It's more, look, it's a more intimate setting where you're really going to spend
recipes.
you're sharing recipes, but you're in someone's home and you're really, maybe smaller groups, but it's much more intense in terms of the conversation you can have versus, you're going to a pizza ranch or whatever, where it really is more of a speech, question, answer, leave, go to your next
mini
event.
rally type of thing.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. I mean, to me, he is someone that can tell you maybe how things are different. Because he's out there experiencing it every day, and how the electorate is different in terms of what they're looking for. So, I mean, he's an interesting person to talk to.
I'd like to see what his take is on those three states we just mentioned, to see how he would work them differently.
And if anyone has been hurt by the nationalization of these GOP debates, it's him, because he hasn't been on the main stage where 4 years ago he was, and he debated very well. And if you look at, someone like Ted Cruz hasn't really been vetted because there hasn't been a conservative to his right to do it on that debate stage. Jeb Bush is going to come at Ted Cruz much differently, and Donald Trump going to come at Ted Cruz much differently than someone like a Rick Santorum would, who would really, I think, press out those issues that they have between one another. So I think it's been unfortunate how the debates have impacted really what's going on the ground here in Iowa.
All right,
and we did have our final, Democratic debate on Sunday night, and of course we only have 3 candidates, so all 3 end up on the stage for the Democrats. But there were some interesting things that happened on Sunday. Bernie Sanders finally released a health care plan and gave some of the details of it. And essentially, it's what he's talked about before, which is he wants to have a single-payer system, sort of what the Republicans have been demonizing since the early 90s. And the one big piece of news, I think, in the plan is he said that he's willing to raise taxes on middle-class families in order to pay for it. And Clinton jumped on that statement and said that she wants to raise middle-class incomes, not middle-class taxes. And I think over the course of the next 2 weeks and into New Hampshire, you're going to hear a lot of that sort of messaging from the Clinton campaign.
And the other thing we heard in that debate was the Hillary Clinton embrace of Obamacare, where I think that'll be a general election issue, where that little soundbite we will see 1,000,000 times from whoever the Republican nominee is or whatever groups are out there peddling TV ads and mail.
Now, speaking of Republican nominees, who is in town, or in the state, I should say?
Well, there's a number of them. The renewable fuels industry is having their convention today, so you got Huckabee, Santorum, and Trump there. I don't know if there's a 4th one.
Probably not Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz is not there. And then Trump has a rally in Ames. He's in Winterset, Altoona, and Ames. He has a rally in Ames in which there's supposed to be some special announcement, which blew up my day yesterday because everyone's like, what's the special announcement? I'm like, why would they tell me what the special announcement is? So that I could tell you?
Tell us, right.
Stop calling. I don't know. Just go.
All right, so we are getting down to crunch time, as we said, as we get closer and closer. You think any surprises are in the near future, or you think everything is pretty much settled in?
Look, I've kind of gone back and forth on this, where on the Republican side it really seems like a 2-person race. And because I think Marco Rubio hasn't ran a great campaign in Iowa. But when you look at it, he is the viable kind of alternative to those two. And I think he's just, by the nature of that, going to have some late momentum. So it might end up being a 3-person race at the end of this. I think Rubio's got some momentum.
Okay.
Which would be a big deal, I think, for Rubio if he could somehow get a 3rd ticket out of Iowa.
A close 3rd. He needs to be competitive.
And I think there's going to be lots of twists on the Democratic side. I mean, we have basically a toss-up race. The Iowa poll had it as 2 points. Sanders seems to have a little momentum, and I think whoever wins, it's going to be a win. I think for a long time people said a meaningful win.
Got it.
And for a long time people said, "Oh, Clinton's got this. It doesn't matter." It does matter, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
We'll find out what happens next week. Thank you, gentlemen.